Hi, Pam here. I wanted to come in and talk to you guys today about chapters in our lives. Chapters come, chapters go, a new one's open, and we're always changing. There's always something new. There's something new to help us with something we're going through, or something to help us to grow and develop and become better people. There's always something new happening in our lives, and each time something new comes, it's another new chapter. Well, today I have a chapter closing in my life, and I wanted to share it with you. Now, I will tell you it involves three little balls of yarn, just these three little scraps left from yarn that I've used during this chapter of my life. And what I'll be doing today is I will be crocheting and creating what I've been doing for 10 years. This will be the last one. And since it takes me so long to make one, usually about 30 to 45 minutes for the one I'm making today, I didn't want to make you have to sit through that whole video of me just yammering on and talking. So I'm going to let you go and go work on this project. And I will come back when I get close to finished and talk a little bit more about this chapter that's closing in my life today. I'll see you soon.
All right.
Hello, I'm back and I am now stitching the last few stitches. I'm sure now you can see what it is I'm making. It is a hat. For almost 10 years I worked on this project making hats for people with cancer. And this hat right here, let me get this last stitch in and I'll set this aside. As you see, I take it right down to the end of the thread there, and that will be used to do an embellishment on the hat that I'll show you later. But let me set this aside. This hat here actually is hat number 618. And I have this little card that I do for everybody that received one of my hats. I called them healing hats because, my goal was to see people healed of cancer and to be healed of the financial problems and just everything that comes with a diagnosis of cancer. It all began with this project with my dad, who had head and neck cancer. Well, he had skin cancer first, then it went to head and neck, and then it went to the lungs, and it went to the stomach, and it went to the brain. It had metastasized. He was given about, I guess, 9 months to live to a year, and that was in 2010, mid-year. And he actually passed on his birthday in May of 2011. We did a lot of driving back and forth. I would drive 6 hours to get him, and then I'd drive another 3 hours from Illinois, where he lived, down to Vanderbilt, where he was receiving some of his treatments. And it was there, as I was working on making a hat for him, that I met a woman at Hope Lodge and her family, and I was just moved by her story and I was touched. And I thought, I think I'm gonna make a hat for her because I knew we'd be coming back every week or so because myself and my three sisters took turns taking dad for his weekly treatments of chemo. And so I knew I'd be back. So I started working on a hat for her. And from that hat, I was just finishing it up, and we're sitting in the waiting area waiting to go in for his chemo. And there were two sisters sitting there, and they saw the hat and they started talking to me. Well, they loved the hat, and I was excited that they loved it. And as we talked, I found out that these two sisters each had cancer. One had breast cancer, the other had pancreatic cancer. So I found out what the colors were for their kind of cancer, and I made them hats just like the one I had made for the first lady. And I don't know what possessed me. I thought, well, I've got all this yarn, I'll make a few more. And I had some yarn around the house, and I thought, well, I'll make some more hats. And so the next time we went, I brought the hats for the sisters to give them. And I'm sitting there working on other hats when this lady comes up and she says, "Are you the hat lady?" And I mean, I was like, well, I had never thought of myself as the hat lady. I've only made a handful of them. But I said, well, I guess maybe I am. And she said, could I get a hat for my mother? And I pulled out a few of the hats I had made, and she selected one for her mother and took it over to her. And I thought, I should write her name down and what kind of cancer she has. Now, I had been studying the colors of cancer, and so I was starting to know which color went with which kind. And I was stunned when I went over and I found out the kind of cancer she had. And the hat her daughter had picked was the color of her mother's cancer. And they probably knew that, but I didn't. And I was surprised that I had a hat in my little bag of hats that actually fit. And so it started from there, and it just kept going. Next thing I knew, I was making hats for children. And some of the hats got rather elaborate because, when a child's sick like that and you find out that they like Scooby Doo, you want to make them a Scooby Doo hat. Or they like a rhinoceros, so you make a rhinoceros hat. And so there were all these different kinds of hats that I made. Gosh, I even made Nemo and a whale, a tractor. One of the hats was a tractor. Um, there were just many, many different kinds that I made, and I really, really enjoyed doing that and getting these to the children. The hats have gone all over the world. Um, on the card, I have a little paragraph that I wrote up, and it says, your hat was made in honor of my father, my mother, family members, friends, and people I have not met who have cancer. Now, yes, my mother has cancer, and we've had several family members with it and friends, and so I did it in honor of all of them, including my dad. But God leads me to pray over each hat for healing, finances, family, and other concerns the recipient of the hat and their family might have. Because, we don't really realize all the different things that these families face, the challenges. I mean, when you have a child in the hospital with cancer, oftentimes they have to travel a long distance to go to a teaching hospital or somewhere that specializes in their child's cancer, which means mom can't work. And oftentimes dad can't work. And so there are financial burdens that people don't realize they have. You've got the burden of travel, the burden of where to stay. They have Hope Lodge and places like that, but, and Ronald McDonald House, but they don't always have enough space for all the people that are coming there. And so there's vouchers and such that you can get to stay cheaper at a hotel, but it's still costing you. Then there's the cost of food and the cost of travel to get there and travel back home. And then you have all your bills at home. So there's a lot of things that they need prayer for. It's not just the physical part of it, but it's the financial and the mental, and it's just so many things that we truly don't think about. So each hat I pray over. That's part of why I didn't want to have you sit through the whole making of the hat, because I want to be praying for these families. Whoever gets this little hat here, I wanted to pray for them and their family, that God would help them and give doctors wisdom and just everything that they could possibly need. And, I said that also in my card, I say, then he uses me, well, various means of delivery to put the hats in the hands of the person he wants to have it. I cannot tell you all the unusual things that have happened with these hats. We had a young man in my community who had cancer, and somebody came to me and told me, and this was early on, and it was like, I need to get a hat for him. He doesn't have much time. And so I real quick made a hat in the colors that were his favorite. He was a high school student, and I wanted to be sure it was something he would love. And so the lady who got the hat, I gave it to her, but she wasn't able to get to him right away. And she came to me later, and she just felt so guilty because she didn't get it to him right away, and he died within a week of getting the hat. And I told her, I said, no, you can't be upset about that, because God has a way of getting things in our hands right when we need it. And that young man needed it in that last week of his life. He needed to hear from God. He needed to receive a card that told him that God loved him and cared about him, and that God had, as I put in this short, or in this short paragraph, may God bless you in a mighty way as you wear the hat he has chosen for you. And God chose that specific hat and those specific colors for this young man. And he loved the hat so much and was so touched by receiving it. He was buried in his hat, which to me is a great honor, to think that something I made for someone meant that much to them and their family. But it's been that way with all of the hats. I had a woman whose niece in Russia had cancer, and she wanted me to do a hat for her. And then we decided that the children in the ward that her niece was in, they just weren't getting things the way we do here in America. And so um, she asked if I would make hats for all of the kids, and I said sure. So I made up a big giant batch of hats, and I shipped them to her, and she was not sure how she was going to get them to Russia, because it's really expensive to mail international, and the weight of all the hats that I've made added to the cost. And so she and I were praying about it, and a friend of hers came to visit and said, I'm going to Russia. Is there anything you'd like me to take to your sister? Well, it's a whole lot cheaper to take that box on a flight to Russia than to have it mailed. And so it was delivered through him. I've had hats go from New York to Texas to California, Washington, and everywhere in between. They've been to Canada, Russia, as I said, and Belize. Every hat has a different story. Each family has a different, I don't know, just a different uniqueness about them. And I had one little girl from Illinois who, her mother and I worked together and got a lot of hats to children at Children's in St. Louis. They've been to Children's at Vanderbilt. They've been to Children's in Knoxville, and Children's in several different places where people had requested them. And so it's been a big part of my life. I mean, but over the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years, I hadn't been making near as many hats. It seemed like all I did was make hats for a long time, and some hats were quick. They take 2 or 3 hours. Some hats took an hour, and then some of the more elaborate ones for the children could take 2 or 3 days or longer. And it's just been a pleasure for me to do. But as time has gone and things started dying down, and my dad passed within the years they thought he would, and I continued to make the hats and felt really good about it. And then my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and so I just kept going. But the last 3 years, it's just been harder and harder, and I just haven't felt the passion for it that I did before. And it's not because I don't care about these families. I care and I continue to pray, but God wasn't sending people to me requesting hats anymore. And with what we have going on here with my husband, I'm not out and about where I'm able to just tell everybody and share with everybody. And so I realized that God was phasing this out, that he was putting somebody else doing this. Because why I did this is because God put me doing it. He knew I needed something to do while I was going through this with my dad. And it was very important. But now I'm going through this with my husband, where he has traumatic encephalopathy syndrome, possibly frontotemporal degeneration, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. They kind of all like to gang up, and they're all very similar. But our lives have changed, and so my passions are changing, and the people that I need to reach out to are changing. And so I'm embarking on this new chapter in my life, and God said it's time to close this one. And literally, as you saw, I just have a little bit of yarn left, and that's it. And I had bought hundreds and hundreds of skeins of yarn, and it just all kind of ended over the last couple of days. I made several little hats using up the rest of the yarn. Like this, I just had a ball of brown and a dark brown and a small little ball of this light brown, and it was just exactly enough. And these hats were from 2 different skeins of yarn that I had, that had already used some of it, but I was at the end, and I thought, let's go ahead and finish them up. It's been an interesting journey, and it's just been something that really helped me through a hard time, because there's nothing that helps you get through a hard time like helping other people. And so when I first picked up the yarn and the thread and the crochet hooks, I didn't know what was really going to happen. I just thought I was making a hat for my dad. I didn't know it was going to grow into making 618 hats and giving them to all these people. So it was a surprise to me. I'd like to go ahead and show you the very first hat I ever made. I didn't have patterns, didn't know how to read them. I had a crochet hook, and I got red and white yarn because my dad was Santa Claus. A lot of people here might not know that, but my dad was Santa Claus. He played Santa Claus in Metropolis for Harrah's and delivered presents to children who didn't have much, and did it every Christmas Eve and every Christmas morning. He went and took presents to these children and wore the costume, and he had the real beard and everything. So I decided red and white yarn, and I'm going to show you my first hat. Try not to laugh because I didn't know what I was doing, but here it is. It's like an elf hat. So anyway, I couldn't give this to my dad. It was too dorky. But what I had done is, instead of starting at the top and working down, I started at the bottom and worked up, and I wound up with this Hershey Kiss looking hat. And then I tried again, and I finally got a hat that was a little bit better. The ribbon is from my dad's funeral. So it did improve, but we've come a long way. The hats are so much nicer. They're softer. I've learned about yarn and everything, and just, I don't know. So I'd like to encourage you that if you can, in the middle of your going through a trial, look at what you're going through and think about what kinds of things can you do that will help others. Um, because there's nothing more healing than to do for somebody else who's going through a hard time. And when the time comes that it's time to phase out that chapter of your life, it's okay. It's okay to let go of that because now you have something new that God has for you to do. And embrace that and rejoice in that because you've made it through one fire and maybe you're going into another. But what I've learned is no matter how hard things are and how hard life gets, there's always something to take from that to carry with you into the next phases of your life. And I hope that I've been able to encourage you today. I hope that maybe you might decide that it's your turn to make hats, or maybe it's your turn to do whatever it is that just comes to your mind. If it comes to your mind, think about it for a little bit and see if it stays there. And if it does, go with it and reach out and touch somebody because every one of us, no matter who we are or where we're at, we're all going through something. And even though people might not recognize that you're going through something, because, like with me, I try to be as positive as I can. That doesn't mean that my life isn't hard. It doesn't mean I'm not going through stuff. It just means that I want to look at the good things and try to embrace those. And so embrace that. Find something you can do to touch somebody else, and you will be rewarded with such a peace of mind to know that you did something for somebody else. And it truly takes away from what we're going through. I'm going to share one more thing because I just thought about this. The two sisters I told you about at the start, the one who had pancreatic cancer, she has passed, and the one with breast cancer, she's still living and doing great. Been cancer free for several years now, but the one who passed away, she began knitting scarves and started giving those to other people who had cancer, and she did some hats, and she told me that she had never thought about how doing something for somebody else would make her feel so good, and how much it had touched her to be able to do something for somebody else. It distracts you from what you're going through. And so many times you start recognizing that what you're going through might not be as bad as what somebody else is going through, or you feel like it's not as bad. Doesn't mean it's not as bad, but oftentimes you find that when you are doing for others. And so anyway, I really don't know how to close this out because I'm just rambling now. But I just want to encourage you that if you can, reach out to somebody else who's going through what you're going through or similar, and be there for them and see what it does for you. I'll be praying for each and every one of you that God will guide you to what you need to do in your life. What is it that you can do to reach out to somebody else? And I know that He's going to give you guidance and wisdom, and that whatever it is He puts you to doing, you will be up to the task and you will be able to do it. And He's going to bring joy to you in the middle of the trial that you're in right now. Thank you for joining me. If you like what you see, I hope you'll subscribe and hit the bell, and any videos that I do will come directly to you. You'll get a notification that I put one up. I will be covering all kinds of different things. Thank you and have a wonderful day.